Well, it's the micro off season. Thanks a lot, Olympics. But that gives us time to talk about everybody's favorite subject, at least on the Facebook groups rumors. And one of the big ones that has come up recently is the talk about how far Andretti Global's relationship with General Motors is going to get. How deep is it going to get? And we've had some unconfirmed things kind of surface, at least publicly, that we need to talk about on the IndyCar side. And now there's even talk about a NASCAR team, to which I would say, isn't Andretti already involved in NASCAR? Well, technically. And we'll talk about why that is and some of the moves that have been made on that side of things, as well as address the specific rumor about Andretti going to Chevrolet as soon as next year in IndyCar. We really haven't seen that much shifting of manufacturer loyalties in IndyCar, especially from the big teams recently. The last one I can really think of was what we used to call Sam Schmidt Motorsports, moving from Honda to Chevrolet when McLaren bought into them. And then even before that, you're thinking back to Ganassi around 2015, moving to Honda Power from Chevrolet, and really hasn't been a lot of movement. So if this were to transpire, whether it's next year or the year after, it would be a very significant shift in the balance of power of IndyCar racing. And we talked about all of these rumors and much, much more that you won't hear about in this video over on my DL 500 Club stream. So if you're not a member there, you missed out on a lot. You're going to get a few nuggets in this video, but I would highly suggest jumping over there for more candid discussion prior to announcements of these sorts of things. But this subject was big enough that we need to talk about it. And another big subject coming, by the way, is a partnership announcement for this channel, which is pretty huge. I cannot wait to share the details of that with you guys. I think you guys are really going to like it. So let's talk about all of the talk that's been going on in the world of motorsports. And it starts with our friend Adam Stern, the best news aggregator in the business, as far as I'm concerned. And he's a pretty good journalist as well. But in this case, he found this report from 93 WIBC, which is the flagship radio station for the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Radio Network. They always broadcast Indy 500, and their parent company also owns the sports network in town. So WIBC is a big deal, but it's talking about Andretti going to NASCAR. And specifically, they got it from this video posted to the Andretti Global YouTube channel. But the real important bit of this is this quote from the video, which specifically, it's not as perhaps groundbreaking as maybe we thought it might be, but essentially there's a hopefully NASCAR put into it. And again, this is put on the Andretti Global YouTube channel. Now here's what's kind of funny and interesting about the hopefully NASCAR thing with Andretti Global. They kind of already are in NASCAR. Their name just isn't attached to the team. And let's kind of explain why. Now, if you are not an IndyCar person primarily, you might not know what the lore is behind the sponsor Gainbridge, or specifically its parent company, Group 1001. Now, Gainbridge was founded in 2018 and entered the auto racing scene in the same year. It's a company founded by or CEO'd by a guy by the name of Dan Taurus. He is a part of Group 1001, which is owned by the Guggenheim family, which also owns, I believe it's the LA Dodgers. I almost said the Boston Red Sox, but it's the LA Dodgers. And they immediately, once they started the company, sponsored someone who, believe it or not, Dan Taurus met in church, a driver by the name of Zach Veach. And they brought that sponsorship to Andretti, what was then at the time known as Andretti Autosport. And they also became the presenting sponsor of the Indianapolis 500. Now, since that point, Gainbridge and Group 1001 have become an integral part of the entire Andretti Global racing effort. Whether we're talking supercars, whether we're talking NASCAR, whether we're talking IndyCar, and in particular, their Formula One aspirations, it's all funded through Group 1001. So when Group 1001 and Gainbridge jumped on board the Spire Motorsport operation in NASCAR, that was an obvious sign to many, many, many of us in the industry that this would indeed eventually become the team that Andretti Global would kind of claim. Now, the question mark of all of this would be, how much would Andretti be involved? Would it be a total team takeover? Would they buy one charter? I think that's still up in the air. But if Andretti is indeed going to NASCAR, it is going to absolutely be through Spire Motorsports one way or the other. Gainbridge or Group 1001 is not on something in auto racing without Andretti being involved in some way. So the fact that they got involved tells you everything that you need to know. Need a little bit more about Spire Motorsports, Andretti, and NASCAR. It's very interesting that the car that is most frequently sponsored by Group 1001 and Spire Motorsports parted ways with its driver recently, Corey LaJoie. Now, of course, there's a lot of performance-related issues with Corey LaJoie. Let's not get it twisted. He didn't just get fired because Andretti Global is just now choosing to make its presence known officially in NASCAR. But I think it's definitely interesting and a bit of a smoking gun to say, hey, the Gainbridge car, which one would think Andretti would have some say in, if not a lot of say in, who drives that car and how it operates and X, Y, and Z, suddenly became available before the start of next season. Now, the big talking point with NASCAR, of course, is a charter even going to be a thing going forward? And we still don't know the answer to that question. I'm beginning to wonder if it's going to take some sort of a protest at the Daytona 500 to, get the parties in line. I hope it doesn't get to that point, but I think it could get very, very ugly between the teams and NASCAR in terms of the charter deal and the charter agreement. But let's assume right now that charters are a real thing and will continue to be a thing well into the future. The number 7 car, of course, is a chartered entry. And would you call it Andretti Global? Would you call it Spire with Andretti? I don't know, but it would not surprise me to see at least the 7 car kind of become an Andretti car next year. But let's talk a little bit more about the growing connections, because of course Spire Motorsports, their NASCAR effort is Chevrolet. Let's talk about the very, very quickly growing relationship between Andretti Global and General Motors. I go back to just before Sebring this year, and it was announced that Chip Ganassi Racing and Cadillac were parting ways in the IMSA series and also the World Endurance Championship. Now, it is my understanding, although neither of these programs have been formally announced, it is probably the worst kept secret in, not only a sports car paddock, but any paddock around the world, that the two teams that will be flying Cadillac's brand outside of course, Action Express Whelen Engineering in global sports car racing are going to be Andretti Global with Wayne Taylor Racing in the United States and Jota Sport in Europe. My understanding is that those would be 2-car teams each, and hopefully Andretti would get the opportunity that Ganassi gets to go over and compete at Le Mans, as well as, of course, the Whelen Engineering team has been able to do, and of course Ganassi's IMSA car has been able to go over there. But Jota will have to go to 2 entries for the season next year to meet the regulations that the World Endurance Championship will now impose onto manufacturers. You must have 2 entries to run a full season in the World Endurance Championship. But whenever this gets announced, Andretti Global with Wayne Taylor Racing would be going to Cadillac and IMSA. And of course, who could forget the fact that Andretti did that big breaking of the internet when they announced that they would be going with Cadillac in their F1 efforts to bring a new manufacturer into the sport. As Mario Andretti said on our channel way back in 2022 at St. Petersburg, Andretti Global continues to tick every box that the FIA could possibly require of them to justify their value to the sport, but yet they continue to get stonewalled and denied. But then we get to the Andretti Chevy rumors in IndyCar. And the first time I'd seen it publicly addressed, although I first heard about it at the Brickyard 400 a couple of weeks ago, this was addressed by Marshall Pruitt in the Racer mailbag this week. And essentially, it comes down to he asked Rob Edwards if there was any legitimacy to it. And Rob Edwards said there's no plans to leave Honda, but Pruitt believes that the contract runs through 2025. So at least from Marshall's perspective, he believes that the first opportunity, unless something changes, and I want to talk about that here in a second, would be that 2026 would be the first time Andretti could go to Chevrolet on the IndyCar side. But I think we need to talk about a few scenarios that could end up with Andretti going to Chevy as early as next year. And let's think about, first of all, the other unconfirmed rumor, but I will put my hat in the ring and say I absolutely believe that this is happening. I think a lot of other people are pretty solidly in the camp of believing this is happening, that Meyer Shank Racing is going to partner on the technical side with Chip Ganassi Racing starting next year. Now there's some talk about, which drivers would move where, how many cars each team would enter. We're going to try to not get into the semantics of that right now. Let's just say, for the sake of argument, that Ganassi and Shank would be partnered up in some way, shape, or form next season for IndyCar. Of course, Meyer Shank Racing will also be running the Honda IMSA program starting next year. That would be a 2-car operation. So Honda getting very, very close and buddy-buddy once again with Meyer Shank Racing, and partnering with Chip Ganassi Racing certainly doesn't hurt their stock. In fact, I would go as far as to say you've got the number 1 team, which is Chip Ganassi Racing, and the number 2 team, which would be Meyer Shank Racing at Honda. And that would move Andretti Global pretty solidly to the number 3 team over at Honda in terms of the pecking order for that operation, for that manufacturer. So if you're Andretti Global, there is some incentive to move over to Chevrolet. Obviously, the going away number 1 with a bullet over at Chevy is Team Penske. They are the factory team for all intents and purposes. And number 2 is definitely Arrow McLaren. But I think there would definitely be a discussion to be had, and certainly with all of these factory deals that Andretti's getting on other aspects of the sport, especially if they solidify a NASCAR program or at least legitimize a NASCAR program with General Motors. It would not surprise me in the least that they would kind of immediately jump to number 2 in the pecking order over at Chevrolet, which would increase their standing with their manufacturer over Honda. The other thing with Honda that I think is quite interesting is the fact that, and maybe this is how something could be put together for next year, contracts aside. We talk about contracts in IndyCar racing a lot, and if it is true that their contract runs through the end of next year, I would tend to expect that that's how things are going to go. But there is definitely a burden on manufacturers to produce as many engines as they are right now. And if you're Honda and you look at an opportunity where you could potentially jettison 3 full-time entries, reduce your costs a little bit, maybe open up some opportunities to do some fun things at the Indianapolis 500 with those 3 extra engines that you wouldn't be supplying to Andretti Global, or I guess it would be 4 with Marco Andretti. And if Chevy's willing to bring Andretti into the fold next year, maybe you look at that. Maybe that is an opportunity for both parties to mutually part ways and have it be mutually beneficial. So while I definitely wouldn't be surprised to see nothing happen next year and Andretti stay at Honda for next year, I think there are legitimate things that make sense if Andretti wanted to leave Honda and go to Chevy next year. it would make some sense for each of the parties involved to make that happen. Of course, it would be difficult with Chevy, as mentioned in the Racer Mailbag. Prema coming in is 2 extra engines. If you talk about some of the rumors about the Indy 500, you think about Brian Reinbold always brings 2 entries. You talk about the potentiality of the Able Motorsports team coming back. That would be an extra engine for the Indy 500. If Foyt did an extra entry, which there's been some talk about that, although there's talk about that every year, right? Like, let's not pretend like we don't talk about that every year. But Chevy could potentially have a lot of burden all of a sudden on their backs. And so, unless there was a team that for some reason would close, or maybe a team, gets their charter and decides to sell to Prema, I wouldn't, I don't see where that burden would suddenly be lifted off of Chevy. I think Chevy is definitely taking on a pretty big amount of work right now, regardless of whether or not Andretti switches over. But that's just my thoughts. Very interesting times. We've still got 2 weeks before the end of this break. Planning on being in Gateway, so we'll see you there. And of course, a big announcement very, very soon. If not tomorrow, definitely next week. So thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.